Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum, dear viewers. Welcome to another episode of Her Thoughts here on Imam Hussein TV. Today we have a topic that focuses on one of the women who was present in Karbala, and that is the wife of Zuhair ibn al-Qayn. Zohair was one of the martyrs that was killed on Ashura, and he was in the camp of Imam Hussein. But there is a backstory to how he actually ended up reaching that very, very high status. So before we get into that, Assalamu alaikum to my dear sisters.
Assalamu alaikum
For joining me. So Zohair's story is quite interesting because it wasn't a straightforward progression, you know, where he was with Imam Hussein from day one. It was almost like a very last minute thing.
Reluctant.
So, you know, to give the viewers a bit of context, Zohair he'd performed Hajj, I believe, you know, along with all the Hajjaj, and he was travelling along the same path as Imam Hussein alayhi salam, but he wasn't particularly wanting to join Imam Hussein. So narrations actually say that when they were travelling, if Imam Hussein was ahead, Zohair would kind of slow down a little bit so they didn't cross paths, and if Imam Hussein stopped somewhere, then Zohair would kind of speed along. But Allah had it that there was a point where they both stopped in the same place, and Imam Hussein sent a messenger to summon Zohair. And Zohair was quite reluctant, and it was actually his wife who said, you have to go and hear what the Imam has to say, you can't just, you know, avoid him. And we know what happened with the rest of the journey. So I guess really today we kind of want to know more about the influence that his wife had, and whether we can apply that in our daily lives and in our households and our communities. And my first question would be, as women, do we have that kind of influence around on the people around us, or do you think it was more because back then there was, you know, a more traditional role where the woman's role primarily was more domestic? What are your thoughts on that?
I think, you know, time and time through generations we see, and especially if we look at our, you know, our parents' generation, we see how strong our mothers are and how strong they've had to be, especially dealing with culture and society. And a woman, especially a mother, and especially in today's generation, has to be so strong, because not only is she looking after the household, not only is she making sure that the house is being run properly, and you know, she's trying to fulfill her duties as a wife, but she's a mother. She has to keep that foundation, that backbone of the house as well, and raise her children as well. And we also know that women, we have, you know, beautiful examples of Bibi Fatima alayhi salam, where Prophet Muhammad, you know, after having preached to the people, he would have, you know, dirt and blood and feces all thrown upon him, and he would be cut and bruised, and she would be cleaning him, and she would be wiping down, you know, the dirt off his face and cleaning his cuts and bruises. So we have her perfect example of strength and of courage and of bravery. And then we also have the examples of our mothers today, where, you know, and I can say this hand on heart, if it wasn't for my mother, how she raised me and how she taught me, I would not be the wife I am today, and I would not be the mother I am today. So we owe a lot to our mothers, who are the older generation, our grandmothers, our aunties, those older figures that we have in our lives, because they can actually hold a house, and we know that a mother or a wife can make a house or break a house, you know?
Absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah, so going back to, I think that you said it beautifully, and when you talk about, you know, women having influence in the you know, domestic sphere, but the thing is, when we look at the wife of Zohair, her influence was outside the home. It was the influence of her husband, that she influenced the decision of her husband, and that is, I think, is beautiful, because within every single one of us there is a sense of goodness. Sometimes we just need that encouragement, or we need that someone outside influence, especially for a spouse to influence you know, their partner. And as you said, you know, Zuhair was traveling from from Mecca, and he was trying to avoid Imam Hussein. If it wasn't when Imam Hussein summoned him, if it wasn't for his wife, he would have never joined. But the thing is, I believe that he did have a sense of goodness within him, and he perhaps just needed that encouragement or that support,
just that little push,
and that goes back to the importance of having a good spouse that supports you. And I always say that when people get married, you know, you look for a partner that will support you in your religious duties as well as others. And I've seen this as well, even in my own household, when sometimes when, you know, we're all lazing about, if one person gets up and prays, we all kind of get up and pray. Like, okay, let's just get up and pray. And sometimes it needs that little push or little encouragement. And I think if we get any lesson from the story of Zohair and his wife, is that within our own life we should be the kind of supporting backbone of each other. If we see someone falling down, we like our partner lacking them, we should lift them up. If we lack, our partner should lift us up. And I think that is how beautiful it is. And just going back to the influence of a mother, I just want to talk about in a religious aspect. Kids, we can tell them to pray as much as we want. We can tell them to fast as much as we want. We can tell them to be good people. But if we are not presenting that in our own actions, they will never mirror that. So it's very important that we show people by action. So even within a household, the mother should always show by actions what she wants as a reflection of her spouse or her kids. So I think that's a very important thing. And I always say within marriage, sometimes people think marriage is 50-50, or, you know, we always focus on the other. He didn't do this for me, she didn't do that for me. But I think sometimes we should focus on, you know, what can we do for the other partner? Because sometimes, you know, even I feel within my own life, you know, sometimes you just can't be bothered. But then when someone else does goodness towards you, you just mirror that and you do goodness back. So always think about, what am I doing? What am I giving back? And a woman does have a huge influence in the household and beyond.
Yeah, absolutely. One other thing that I kind of picked up on when it came to the story of Zohair's wife is she wasn't advising him about like a household issue or something at home. This was, at the time, like a community issue. Some people might say it was a political issue. And the fact that his wife, who sometimes, you know, we're always told, oh, Islam oppresses women, you know, we have very traditional roles. Actually, not just Zohair's wife, but even if we look at the time afterwards, during the time of Mukhtar al-Thaqafi, etc., it said that the women and the wives of the men that either did support him or didn't support him had a lot of pull and influence. And this is when it, you know, came to outside issues outside of the home. So it just made me think she was quite well read, well versed, and quite aware of what was going on outside as well.
I think women have a lot of strength within them. Say that Zainab is you know, shows that, epitomizes that on the day of Karbala. And I always say that, you know, we are in a period where, you know, there's so many political correctness words going on, but in essence what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has created is a soul within us all. And, you know, we have roles in this world, but we all have souls that are striving towards the same thing, and we all tested in different ways according to how we are in this world, but again the tests are similar. So if you're looking at a woman's role in a traditional Islamic way, not in a, you know, Western feminist secular way, but if we're looking at the way that we are taught through the teachings of Ahlul Bayt, women have so much patience, and we're endured with such beauty within us. And it's not just patience, and I'm saying in terms of how Sayyidah Zainab, you know, shows on the day of Ashura. So when you look at Zohair's wife, I believe her name is Dalham. She's like his voice of reason. She's saying what's in his heart, because had he not had the tawfiq, not had that guidance, Imam alayhi salam, Imam Hussein would not have called him. And he was obviously the Imam who was summoning him, and his wife was that voice of reason. And that light was in him, and he was given that tawfiq to then give his life in honor. And she equally will be reaping the rewards today. And exactly as Zahra says, that we we are voices of reason for one another. In a marriage, there is no I in there. It's about one another. We both want to end up in Jannah. You both want your children to go to the best place, your parents to go to the best place. Remind each other of your duties, of your responsibilities. Don't look at this as a competition, as we look at in other societies and cultures. Islam is telling us that we all, marriage is a beautiful union, and it's an opportunity for you to, if one of you isn't praying, and like Zohair says, maybe it's difficult for one person to get up to pray for Fajr, and the other person gets up, and that person gets up and starts making it into a habit for the other person. So these are things that are so important to look at, because you can look at marriage, and like you're saying, much beautiful advice that you give to the youth, that if you're going to look for a car and a house, and that's not taking you to Jannah, but a woman like Zohair's wife is going to take you to Jannah, and a husband who's going to also take that advice and not say, oh, you know your position and just don't speak to me. So again, it goes hand in hand. We are vehicles going towards a journey of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and we are, you can say the husband is one front wheel, the wife is, however you want to say it, but you have to keep that vehicle going.
Absolutely.
And it's really important too.
I think, just picking up from what you were saying, and also what Zohair, what you were saying, the lesson that we can learn from Zohair's wife is, today we are, you can call us fortunate, you can call us unfortunate living in the West. We are not in countries where we've had to see our loved ones being made shaheed. In places like Iraq, Syria, Pakistan, where people are, made shaheed daily for struggles, for the sake of Islam. Can we, hand on heart, say that if the calling of Imam was to come, would we give up our sons? Would we give up our husbands for the sake of Islam? How Zohair's wife, Zohair has now reached the status of shahadat because of his wife, and she will be rewarded, like you correctly said. Can we then also influence our husbands to say, go for the sake of Islam, die in the name of Islam, become shaheed, knowing full well that we will not see them again? But are we at that level to allow our husbands to go and fight?
It's not easy.
It's not easy. It's not easy. And you would love to say that, like we recite in Zayat Ashura, I would love to, hand on heart promise and say, yes, I am ready to sacrifice my loved ones. But when it comes down to it, it's not easy. It's not easy.
I suppose it comes down to having God-centric relationships, whether it's with our spouse or our children or our siblings or whoever, our parents. If we have Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and the Ahlul Bayt at the centre of, as a central focus of our relationships, then it becomes a lot easier to make these sacrifices.
And that's a level that we all have to strive to.
Because I think we mentioned in a previous episode, I think I mentioned, sometimes a lot of our relationships are, the foundation is ego. This is my husband and this is my daughter and my son, and if that's how our relationships are based, then it's a lot harder then to make a lot of progress in that direction. But if I go into a marriage thinking, what does Allah want me to get out of this marriage, and what is my duty towards Allah through this marriage, then I guess it becomes a much more productive relationship.
Just to add one more thing, I think we should all ask ourselves, sometimes when our husbands are working in any capacity, whether it's religion or outside work, this is not an attack on women, by the way, but sometimes we should ask ourselves, are we a burden upon them, or do we make it easy for them? And also for the men, also for the woman. Because I feel sometimes, if the husband works too much, you're working too much, you're not spending enough time with us, you're not doing this, you're not doing that. We see that the wives in Karbala, they made it very easy for the husband. They actually made it easy. It's very difficult to know that you're going to be martyred, you're going to be killed, and then if you have the sense that your wife is going to be widowed, if you have a wife that's like showing you the difficulty that she's going to go through, that's going to make the journey and the decision even more difficult. What the wives in Karbala done is that they made the journey very easy for them. They encouraged and made it very easy for them, rather than becoming a burden upon them. And this is not just for women. Sometimes men are a burden upon women as well in their struggles and in their path. But a question that we must all ask ourselves is that how can we make it more easier and be a comfort to one another rather than a burden upon one another? another. And this is for both men and women. So I think what we learned from the wife of Zuhair is that, you know, she made the path very easy for Zohair to take that decision without feeling guilty that he is sacrificing for the way of Allah. And we must find out, because there's a lot of divorces that happen within our community. And one of the things that a husband says oftentimes, and I've seen this cases, is that my wife keeps moaning, she keeps telling me this, she makes it difficult for me. And then they find that very, very difficult. And then for them, it's they just want to.
And they're not very difficult sort of situations where, you know, you can't rectify them. So, you know, it's just a bit of understanding, and because marriage with anybody will have its own challenges. Every human being, two very complex beings coming together, you know, you're going to have to work it out with somebody. There's no perfect match anywhere. And I think sometimes it's so sad to hear about couples, you know, separating, divorcing because, oh, it's this and it's that. You think, but these aren't even issues. You
But
know,
I
these
think, you know, that's very true. But I also think, as an outsider, if you listen to their issues or their daily struggles, we can then, as an outsider, say, oh, this is not very difficult. Why did you just not compromise? But when you're in that moment and when you're in that situation, sometimes people don't see a way out, and people are struggling within themselves. But yes, I completely understand about how, you know, we have compromise in a marriage, and I truly believe that a woman can either break a marriage or keep a marriage, but also that same goes for a man as well.
Absolutely.
A man
can break a marriage,
a man can break it or keep it.
I think you're both there as a support mechanism. And I think, you know, if you're going to say that, you know, I mean, I've literally spoken to people who say, you know, this is exactly similar situation to you, how you've described, you know, my wife doesn't do this, and you think, but you know, there's children involved, or you know, it's not like there's abuse or alcohol or, you know, gamble. You know, those things are very, very difficult to overcome. But if it's behaviour, then we are all able to change our behaviour. And wouldn't you want to do it for the sake of, we were talking about sacrifice in these episodes, and it is a sacrifice for a woman. I mean, no one is born to be, you know, in the West we're taught yourself and your mindfulness and you are happy, but in Islam we talk about responsibility, about taking care of everyone as well as ourselves. We mustn't ever not eliminate that. But I think it's important that, remember, your focus is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, not that, you know, life is going to be perfect in any means.
And you know, also it's an essence of jihad, it's an essence of ibadat. We have to remember that, yes, as women, as married women, as mothers, we will face trials, we will face tests, and we will be in certain situations in our homes where things will be a struggle for us. But that's a jihad from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And also it's an ibadat, looking after your home, looking after your husband, looking after your children, making life easy for your husband, but also, you know, the same goes for a man, making life easy for your wife. These are all ibadats that allow us to gain closeness to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Not only do you gain closeness to your spouse, but you gain closeness to your creator.
Exactly.
And ultimately your journey is back to him.
I mean, if there's the saying, and you reminded me that, you know, the jihad for a woman is to, you know, please her husband. And I know the feminists will not like that comment, but the point is that, you know, overcome yourself is what you said, the ego.
And we can't go on the battlefield. We don't have that opportunity, but the perfect jihad in front of us is the jihad of maintaining one's izzat, one's respect, and maintaining one's home.
But even the battle jihad, of the battle is the higher jihad is the self.
Absolutely.
So
your jihad of your nafs.
Exactly. So
we've got the bigger one.
Exactly. So it's for men as well. And I think it's important to remember that, giving each other those rights. But I think their relationship just shows the beauty that, okay, he could have really at that point turned around and said,
who do you think you are?
Don't tell me
absolutely.
And especially in Arabia.
So then the question
arises,
my next question would be, you know, we said that obviously Zohair had some kind of light, and he was open enough, and he had a heart that was good enough for him to be a recipient and take in what she was saying and digest it and then listen to her. What would you say to women or men or whoever? It doesn't have to be a husband-wife relationship, could be siblings, could be parent, child, whatever, where you're trying to, you know, guide someone and pick them up when they're kind of falling off the wagon a little bit, or just not particularly inclined to do whatever it is they're supposed to do Islamically, for example, be it the hijab or praying or fasting or whatever it is, if they're not so open, how do we then go about that?
The first thing to remember is that we all have a journey, and this journey is ours alone. But we're blessed with people along that journey.
Yep.
Be it a good spouse, be it a good parents,
Yeah.
as you mentioned, your parents, your siblings. If we have that support, then what a mercy from Allah. And again, they're means to help us
Yep.
in our journey. We could be alone, but the point is that each of this journey, we are going to go up and down, and we have to expect that. And equally, if I'm going to go up and
Yeah.
down, then you're going to go up and down. You know, we're all going
Yeah.
to be on that process. So never judge other people to say, oh, you know, you're not doing well and I'm doing well, because tomorrow it could be you there and they're
Yeah.
not there. So our spiritual, you know, progress is always going to be up and down.
Yeah.
That's one thing to remember. And secondly, it's that whatever you you wish to do in terms of like helping one another, don't be condescending and judgmental,
Yeah.
but show the mercy of the Holy Prophet, peace be
Yeah.
upon him. Show the mercy of Allah. Allah gave chances to Pharaoh to the last moment.
Yeah.
So that in itself is your barometer that you should never give up on anybody. And in terms of that light, I mean, if you know, God doesn't shines that light to everybody, but it's whether we take that invitation. As He says, I'm here closer than your jugular vein.
Yeah.
It's whether we take that invite.
Yeah. I mean, and you're
Absolutely.
talking about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala giving mercy. Even if we have perfect example of Imam Hussein, how he gave mercy to Hur. And Hur came and, you know, and begged Imam Hussein for forgiveness, and Hur was then made shaheed. So, you know, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is most merciful. We all, like you said, we all have an individual journey to get through. And we're not perfect, we're not born perfect, but we can do what we can to strive and to better ourselves daily. And that's why we have these tests and trials in our lives, in order to struggle, but we also strive in the way of Allah to gain closeness to Him. If we didn't have any trials, you know, how can you perfect yourself? How can you become the better, perfect example of yourself? And also, you can also then help others. If you've been through a trial, you can then, you know, potentially help others who may be going through that similar type of situation, and to say, look, this is my advice to you. Try it; it may work.
Definitely, yeah. I think, firstly, like I said previously, it's by action. So sometimes words, you know, doesn't affect the individual, but actions will affect. And when someone sees someone doing it, as humans, we like to mimic and like to mirror each other. So sometimes, especially if you're living in close proximity to someone and you're living very closely to someone, they will mirror your actions to a certain extent. Secondly, as the Quran says, even Allah doesn't change a nation until they change themselves. Change has to come within, and someone can do everything within their capacity to try to help someone, but ultimately the change needs to come within. If they are not willing to change themselves, then you know, you won't be able to change them. And thirdly, I would say it's about communication, the way you communicate with someone. Sometimes when you seem demanding, or you seem like you're demanding something from someone, they will, you know, they might not listen. So it's about the way you communicate. Each individual has a way to communicate within them. If it's a rebellious teenager, there's a certain way to communicate with them. If it's an older person who is very set in their ways and will not change, there's a certain way to speak to them where they feel respected and they speak. If it's a spouse, there's a certain way to speak to them. So each person, there's a certain way of communication. Communication is key, but then we also need to know how we can communicate with someone for them to change. And sometimes just accepting that people won't change. Noah couldn't change his son, and his son refused to, and his wife. So even the prophets, sometimes they couldn't change, or the imams, they couldn't change their wives or the people that are close to them. So sometimes it's just accepting that you won't be able to change. That's why I always tell people, some people get married and they don't like something within them. They'll say, no, you know, they'll change after marriage. I always tell people, never get married to someone with the intention that or the expectations that they will change, because sometimes someone will not change.
Absolutely.
So always get married to someone that if there is an element within them that you would know that you cannot live with that person, if they still had that element and you're hoping that they will change, then don't do that. So I would say communication, like I said, and actions, and showing them. how it's done.
But always to pray to Allah to guide people, because it doesn't mean that, like you're saying, you know, you mentioned Nuh alayhi salam, you know, his own son and his own wife, you know, there's a prophet right there, and who's closer than these two relationships? But they didn't see, you know, his worth and what his message was. So at the end of the day, always pray, and he did pray till the end, and then Allah said, you know, acceptances. But again, who are we? Because we don't know what lies in someone else's heart, and only Allah knows if He's going to give that guidance or He's not. But He's the best Malik, and He knows. So we, you know, we leave our affairs to Allah. But at the end, our prayer is what we have to ask for. So we
I think what you mentioned, Zohair, about talking to someone appropriately to where they are is so important. You know, I've been reading this book called Calm Parents, Happy Kids, and it's about how, you know, if you have a kid who's throwing a tantrum, you shouting at them in the middle of that tantrum, it's like you're speaking a different language. You're not going to get through at all. And it's about putting your emotions aside, and at that moment you're probably annoyed, you might be embarrassed. How's my child embarrassing me like this in front of other people? And you need to put all that aside and think, okay, all he or she needs is a hug right now, and then we can sort this later. And sometimes that's what adults.
Exactly.
It's funny because I'm talking about that whenever I used to take my children out when they were young, and I'd lay the foundation right there and say, right, we're going out, no one's asking for anything, or you know, you can have one thing. It's quite strict, and but I made sure they knew how I expected them to behave, and not in a threatening way, but it's just that this is how. You know,
but I mean, you say that, Zohair. I do that with my children, and my children are younger, and I say, okay, we're going to so and so's house. Please behave in this way, or we're going to this majlis. Please behave in this way. Please don't run around. Please don't embarrass me. So we all do that as mothers.
But it works. So I was going to say is that it works because what you're saying to that child is that this is what I expect. And one thing I really do admire in the West is how they look at child psychology. You're reading books, whereas our parents, it was very much like sometimes my children will be analysing behaviour from perhaps the more traditional ways, and they'll be saying parents are very they're dictating that this is what I want. It doesn't matter who you're marrying. It's what I want. What education you're getting. I want this. But whereas in the West they allow the child the freedom to think, and we should be encouraging our children. That's how I raised my point was saying that when they were young is that give them the standards so that they know they're looking up to you, they want to make you happy, but they also know going and having a tantrum in the middle of a supermarket is not acceptable. And alhamdulillah, I never did that. They were always so well behaved. But it's about how you're very right in reading those books, because we're not born with manuals. We need to learn these things.
Exactly. And when you talk about child psychology, it's quite interesting because children need discipline and they need structure in their life.
Absolutely.
And that's one thing that we were actually discussing during this coronavirus pandemic, is that it's ruined the structure for children. So before they had the structure of school, they had the structure of education. Now the structure is gone, and a lot of children are finding it very difficult and misbehaving, or they're not really reaping the benefits of their day. So kids need structure. That's number one.
Absolutely.
They need discipline to a certain
Sorry,
degree.
just before we continue, we've got I think a few minutes left of the show, so.
I was just going to quickly ask you too, because you've got young children.
And I was just going to point out,
how has it been for you with children that are sort of at school age?
I'm so glad that Zohair brought this up, because yes, and it's very kind of in with the topic of today, how as a mother, as a wife, we've had to keep our family and keep our household structure as routine as we can with this whole coronavirus pandemic, with the lockdown. We've had our own work to do. Maha Ramadan was in the middle. We were fasting. We were homeschooling our children. Our husbands are at home from working from home. So that was a test in itself as well. And I think, it comes beautifully back to the point where a mother, a woman, a wife can really hold the house together. And if you are calm, and if you just take a step back and say, look, I am human. I am not Sayyidah Zainab, but I can try and gain some sort of strength from her in order to better myself and keep my household together. And I just want to hear your thoughts as well, Zohair. How did you cope with this whole lockdown, and how did you cope with the kids as well at home?
No, I completely agree with you. I think the kids really take a lot from the mother. I've tried this myself. Once my kids fell down, I was like, oh my God. And he just started crying more. And then I've tried it other times where he's fallen down, and I said, it's okay. You'll be okay. And he just they become so
they
calm.
reflect
become-
you,
yeah.
don't
They
Yeah.
reflect the emotion of the
Yeah.
mother, and it's very important how we communicate with them, how we speak to them, because I really believe, like you said, that the woman really does hold the household together.
Definitely.
And I really feel like when I'm really present in the house and I look after the house, and it really does,
Does make
it's
a
the
And
big
they
glue to the
like it,
family.
you know. Children appreciate that when they come back from school, you know, dinner is ready and
My kids
you
are
know, and
adults, they still love it. So
you know,
it doesn't,
well,
it's a
and then
homely
this is me.
feeling.
I love going to my mum's house and having her food, and
Yeah.
it's that homely feeling.
Yeah.
No, honestly, hats off to these mothers
Yeah.
who've managed in the virus period, because
Definitely.
it's not been an easy task.
Absolutely.
But alhamdulillah, I think Sayyida's made beautiful points,
Yeah.
that it's the women, we are the gel, and
Definitely. I wish we had more time to continue. Unfortunately, we have run out of time. The show's absolutely flown by, as always. Please do join us for a further episode of Her Thoughts, inshallah, next time. But for now, assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.